either the Republican Party, that is Donald Trump and Mike Pence, or the Democratic Party, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. The upcoming election is, unsurprisingly, surrounded by controversy as each party accuses the other of attempting to hijack the elections. Both parties, however, are riddled with distrust and mistrust, but one thing is clear. Regardless of the winner, political elites, in the form of both Republicans and Democrats, will continue to run the show. Ultimately, it is the deep state that will win and the American people that will lose, no matter the outcome. Today, we are joined by John Whitehead, a constitutional attorney, author, and president of the Rutherford Institute. Good afternoon, or rather, good morning, and welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you, and good afternoon to you.
Thank you. So the upcoming elections are a point of contention not only among the general public, but within governance structures at large. Could you begin by explaining to us exactly why this is the case?
Well, what most people don't understand around the world, about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a leaked memo from the Federal Bureau of Investigation in this country that indicated there was a deep state that runs basically the American government. And they didn't explain what the deep state was, but there's been a number of studies that have been produced, one coming out of Princeton University in 2014, that studied all the laws that have been passed in Washington, D.C. for over 20 years. And the conclusion was, from this study by the professors at Princeton University and Northwestern University, was that the United States is ruled by approximately 585 billionaires who donate to all the politicians, create what we see out there, keep the public and the general populace and the people thinking that they're really voting in somebody that will represent them. But as you stated in your opening statement, you were really clear, is that it will continue. There is a government that operates in Washington, D.C. that continues. It's ruled by the 1%, as the Princeton University professors called. And even when the majority of citizens disagree, the report showed that the economic elites would control and get what they wanted. It's called biased pluralism. There was another study that goes right along with it that studied all psychopathics, where the psychopathic personalities congregate in America. They studied all across the country, the 50 states. They came to the conclusion that Washington, D.C. is where they gather, basically. And psychopaths have no feeling, no empathy for others. They're in it for their own good. So unfortunately, that's what's happened in the United States. And as we see the people who run the government, the top, 60 of the top 500 corporations in this country pay no taxes. And during this pandemic, believe it or not, this COVID outbreak, the top 12 richest Americans in the United States increased their wealth by $283 billion. That's Jeff Bezos, who runs Amazon, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, Warren Buffett, Elon Musk, and down the list. So it's pretty clear, if you're just watching and studying instead of just believing what you see on television in this country, that this is not the country that the so-called founding fathers put together in 1776 and developed through the Constitution of this country. So that's the state of affairs in America. The average American, by the way, spends more money on taxes in this country than they do on food, clothing, and health care, believe it or not. And the homeless population is huge. Some of the bigger cities are collapsing now. So America is in really a lot of trouble, and I think it's going to affect the rest of the world as well.
Mm-hmm. And then whether the Republicans or the Democrats win, the American government will be characterized by, to quote you, government surveillance, weaponized drones, militarized police, endless wars, SWAT team raids, asset forfeiture schemes, overcriminalization, profit-driven private prisons, graft and corruption, and an array of other evils. This certainly paints a horribly bleak picture. Would you say that America is damaged beyond repair at this point?
It seems to be damaged beyond repair, yes. And it's amazing, under the Trump administration just recently, and again, the average American watches television up to 150 hours a month. So their eyes are plastered to a TV set, which is run by 7 major corporations, which work with the government, by the way. So they don't really understand what's basically going on. You have to read, you have to study to understand it. And most people don't realize this, but recently the Trump administration, by way of the National Institute of Health in this country, awarded $23 billion to 7 major corporations to develop artificial intelligence, which will be on our smartphones, our wearable devices, and our software that'll track everywhere we go, what our temperature is, our eye movements, everything. And so we're moving into a state of affairs, and this is going to affect the rest of the world. Eventually, I think it's going to go global, obviously. Artificial intelligence is the future, and you're talking about robotics that will be looking at us humans. And the question at the end of the day we're facing in America and the rest of the world will be facing is when those robotics look at us, how will they view us? And the way that the major corporations view us now is as data bits, something to be mined for money, watch, they take your money. And these are all facts. This is basically based on the studies that I have been citing. But, you know, when you have this kind of money going toward developing artificial intelligence, and Google has announced that by 2029, it's called the doctrine of singularity, the human mind is going to fuse with artificial intelligence. And Google, by the way, or the government, they report people to the police in this country if you say the wrong word on the internet. So we're in a situation. If you've ever seen the movie The Matrix or some of those movies, they predict the future of where things were headed, and we're there already, in my opinion.
And then while many Americans attempt to emphasize the differences between the Republicans and the Democrats, and more narrowly, Trump and Biden, you have stated that you believe that similarities between the parties and candidates far outweigh the differences and that they are essentially the same. What makes you say this?
What makes me say this is that they do the same policies. You know, under every president, the surveillance state increases. Under every president, the people who have the money, who donate to the government, make more money every time. You know, and everything you're doing is being watched. The police shootings in this country, there are 80,000 SWAT team raids in this country annually, every year, where police are crashing through doors like the Nazis did in Nazi Germany and shooting dogs. Up to 500 dogs a day are shot in this country by these SWAT teams dressed as the military. These all continue the same. It doesn't matter who is the president, and it gets worse. It gets worse. It gets worse. And unfortunately, as I look at history, you know, America looks more like the Roman Empire to me every day. And what happened to the Roman Empire? It extended its power. America has over 1,000 bases in 177 countries, and we're bombing continually. Over 80,000 bombs have been dropped in the Middle East by Donald Trump. Over 100,000 were dropped by Obama in his last 4 years. So it's the same. They're dropping the bombs. They're killing people, and there seems to be, again, like I say, the psychopathic personality doesn't really care if you kill someone as long as you're making money. And that's where the United States is at today.
Okay. And then the political elites hailing from both parties ultimately have control over the country. How much power exactly do these elites wield, and how do they use it to propel forth the notion of the deep state?
Oh, well, they go through advertising, through the mainstream media. They determine what people eat, how people think, where they go, who their so-called enemies are. Like I say, the average American, again, it's a sad thing to see that young people today, your teenagers, are watching up to 5 hours a day on their cell phones. They just stare at the cell phones. And that information, by the way, is provided by people like Facebook and Google, who work with the government and the secret agencies and the so-called deep state. So basically, as some people have said, and theorists, is that all the government wants is the money, and they want control over us. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And it's a sad future when, you know, like I say, when you see all these billionaires making money, and the average American now is in trouble. Homelessness is increasing, and all the things we're seeing, the city's collapsing. It's not a good situation, and they don't seem to care as long as they're making their money. And they can escape at any time, by the way. There are underground bunkers built across this country for the elite to escape, and even in Washington, D.C., but they don't build underground bunkers for the American people to escape in times of crisis.
And then the Department of Homeland Security has been tasked with assisting in the securing of elections and the protection of the elections from cyber attacks, yet are notorious for violating principles of freedom. You've argued that the DHS has turned America into a police state. What have they done in the past that has led you to this conclusion?
Well, the Department of Homeland Security, when it was erected after the 9/11 attacks, started handing out military equipment to local police. You know, you have small towns in this country that have 5,000 citizens. They now have tank-like vehicles. They have grenade launchers. They all wear military outfits. They have automatic weapons. They have hollow point bullets. I mean, I'm a former military officer. We couldn't use them. They were considered illegal and cruel. You have 175,000 federal agents in this country dressed in what we would call military gear with hollow point bullets now that can shoot American citizens. There's 5 bullets for every man, woman, and child in this America. And that, by the way, that has increased under Donald Trump's presidency. So with all that and then increasing all the surveillance gadgets and everything we're seeing, I mean, we're basically in a total surveillance state now. I mean, even this conversation we're having is being recorded and being watched. And today we find out when people get shot in this country, I mean, we have virtual education in this country now. It's been moving in that direction. We had a case where a small child, 12-year-old, had a toy gun in his own bedroom, and a teacher saw it, and they sent the police to his home, and he wept and cried. It's not a crime to do that in this country. But like I say, they're watching everything, and that's all come under the Department of Homeland Security, and they're continuing to develop those programs. And that's basically, I think, a paranoia about the American people, who, by the way, as the studies show in this country, are not really a violent people, by the way. The government is much more violent.
And then finally, the game is rigged. So is there really any winning for the general population in the face of America's political elites?
There's only one way to win in this country, and that's the people who wrote the government. James Madison, who wrote our Bill of Rights back in the 1700s, said they were staking everything they believed on the fact that the American people could govern themselves. And our Constitution starts with the 3 words, "We the people establish the government." I'm trying to get people to see that they are the government, and if they take over their local governments in this country, we can see some change. But you'll have to get them away from the screen devices and the television screens, and that's going to be very difficult to do.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for that interesting discussion about the upcoming U.S. elections.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was John Whitehead, constitutional attorney, author, and president of the Rutherford Institute, talking to us about how the 2020 American elections have already been won, not by the Republicans or the Democrats, but by the political elites in the U.S.
As the crisis in Yemen continues, 80% of the population are in desperate need